Hello everybody, my name is Rembo, also known as Rembo. I'm the chair of research for the Liberalist International Association and a member of the Liberalist of Netherlands and Flanders, being from Flanders myself. I'm here with you today for the educational video surrounding the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and why I'm not exactly the biggest fan of said documents. I'll be using the document itself for illustration and to give me the talking points, which I'll be going into. So without much further ado, let's get into it. The actual title of the document is Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And I'll first start off by reading this little highlighted bit. We are resolved to free the human race from the tyranny of poverty and want, and to heal and secure our planet. We are determined to take the bold and transformative steps which are urgently needed to shift the world onto a sustainable and resilient path. As we embark on this collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind. All right. That's a nice little start of the type of language that we'll be seeing quite a lot of in this document. Imprecise language, pointing to sloppy thinking, misapplication of technical terms, or application of terms that don't really have any actual meaning or no real applicable meaning in reality. So we're going to start off by addressing the points tyranny of poverty and wants. Poverty is not a very enviable state, but the problem is poverty, unless you really constrain the definition of poverty like we do with something like extreme poverty, then it's a relational concept. You're poor in relation to somebody, and we see in many studies also point to the psychological effects of poverty having more to do with relational poverty than absolute poverty. The Gini coefficient and such point, and studies surrounding that point to that very clearly. So what it seems to me that a sentence like that is designed to do is to elicit the idea that this, by using the term tyranny, it's implied that it's somebody's fault, that somebody here is at fault, that somebody is responsible, that somebody is oppressing people through poverty that is wholly and completely avoidable. And the same term is applied to wants, which once again, and put in an even more deep level, points to completely utopian and unrealistic expectations and or a complete misunderstanding of the basics of economics. Want is a consequence of scarcity, and scarcity is a basic element of existence. We'll get into that a little bit further, but the kind of language that they use when they say things like heal and secure our planet, that just points to this gigantic hubris, as if they know what the optimal, healthy state for our planet should be, and that they are the ones to decide which bold and transformative steps are going to be taken. And bold steps aren't necessarily a good thing, especially when we're talking about a massive supranational organization imposing their will and all kinds of regulations. And transformative steps, well, how good something like that is, how desirable something like that is, depends wholly on what is being transformed from what into what. So when they speak of this collective journey where no one will be left behind, that's collectivists, that just sounds collectivist and authoritarian to me. There's no element of choice anywhere in there. And in that whole regard, before we continue on in this document, I'd like to quickly address the concept of sustainability. The concept of sustainability in the way it's applied here is useless. It's a nebulous concept that suffers from certain very severe flaws in assumptions, and that is completely inapplicable in any real situation. Something like in very technical sense, in very tight constraints, sustainability can be used. A unsustainable spending pattern, for instance, you're spending more money than you're getting in, than you're actually making. That's an unsustainable spending pattern in the mid to long term, for instance. But when you apply it to a larger scale, like the economy or consumption and production processes, as we'll see later in this document, it just falls flat on its face. Because a few hundred years ago, I mean, the sustainable use of a resource, for instance, a few hundred years ago, not even all that long ago, crude oil was not a resource but a nuisance. It's technological advancements and societal advancements that have made crude oil a resource to turn into other resources, which can be turned into other resources, and so on and so on, through technological and industrial processes. So if you were to ask somebody from the 1500s, how much oil do we need to feed a global civilization of 4 billion people, he wouldn't be able to answer you. He wouldn't have the right concept, he wouldn't have the conceptualization or the information required to say something like that. And if you were to ask him, how much agricultural land do we need would we need to sustain 4 billion people, and the answer he would give you would be wholly dependent upon technological and societal factors. He could not predict that we have the huge access to artificial fertilizers thanks to fossil fuels, and the fact that a lot of carbohydrates are extracted from natural gases and such through the Haber process, the fact that a lot of farm machinery is fed with fossil fuels, and so on and so on. All of these things are made in factories which are fed by fossil fuels, and a lot of the energy used in all that production is produced once again. I mean, they wouldn't be able to conceptualize all of this. Their idea of the value of human labor is dependent, I mean, as a resource, is dependent upon all those factors. So that just shows that trying to apply a concept like this, linked to this concept of central planning, as we'll be exposed to a little bit more farther on, it's terrible. It's a terrible idea. But let us move on to the next part of the document. So, header number 7, our vision. In these goals and targets, we are setting out a supremely ambitious and transformational vision. We envisage a world free of poverty, hunger, disease, and want, where all life can thrive. We envisage a world free of fear and violence, a world with universal literacy, a world with equitable and universal access to quality education at all levels, to healthcare and social protection, where physical, mental, and social well-being are assured. A world where we reaffirm our commitments regarding the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation, and where there is improved hygiene, and where food is sufficient, safe, affordable, and nutritious. A world where human habitats are safe, resilient, sustainable, and where there is universal access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. So, utopian socialist collectivist. Those are the 3 words that pop into my head when I read something like this immediately. Once again, they want a world free of want, fear, and violence. Those 3 things. Want. Once again, unless you narrowly define want, so narrowly as it to be completely useless concepts or a completely unrecognizable concept to anybody that uses language in the normal sense. You can't create a world free of wants. Creating a world free of fear is completely ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. If I'm afraid I'm going to lose my girlfriend, how are you going to protect anybody from that? That's a form of fear. I mean, that just shows that once again, unless you narrow your definition to such narrow, well, to such a degree that it becomes completely useless or recognizable, impossible, utopian, violence, exact same case made there. A world where all life can thrive. That one the exact same point can be made there. I mean, this doesn't mean anything. This is emotional language that seems to me to be designed to do nothing but draw people in emotionally so that they don't take a closer look at what actually are the implications of the things that are being said here. When they say they want a world with equitable and universal access to healthcare and social protection, and to ensure the human right to safe drinking water, then that to me seems like internationally mandated government programs or government duties suddenly opposed on societies. It should be societies, it should be the citizens' duty to decide what is and what is not the job of the government to do. Whether people want to have government programs ensuring certain things, that should be at least something that's up to the vote for the population and not something that is imposed from on high by an organization like the United Nations. And these positive, right, for this I'm going to go into a quick little distinction. There are two ways of wording a right: a positive way and a negative way. Well, at least two ways. By positively giving somebody rights, you say, for instance, you have the right to X. A negative way of giving somebody the same right would be nobody has the right to deny you X or to take X away from you. Perhaps outside of these circumstances, like you could say you have the right to X outside of these circumstances. The inherent difference here is the duty that is automatically attached to this right. The duty is much narrower in the negative way, that if the right is worded in a negative fashion, and therefore the duty that is imposed on other people to uphold that right or not infringe that right is much narrower, much more well defined, and therefore much less susceptible to all kinds of misinterpretation or misuse. If I say nobody has the right to deny you access to safe drinking water, then it's pretty clear. If there's safe drinking water available somewhere and somebody denies you access to it, then that is not okay. But I say you have the right to safe drinking water and there's no safe drinking water to be had around, then who is who's then your right is being infringed upon, but by who? Reality? It shouldn't work that way. That's a I mean that's a situation that you don't run into with a negative way of wording these rights. And when an organization using this kind of emotional language, this socialist, utopian, collectivist, authoritarian drivel starts speaking about physical, mental, and social well-being being assured, that just fills me with a sense of dread that is completely unimaginable. Well, unless you're a little bit like me, then you can probably very well imagine it. Because mental and social well-being, A, so vague and impossible to define, and B, I do not want United Nations anywhere near my mental and social well-being. Having them as far the frick away from me as possible, these overbearing bureaucrats, is the best thing it would be the best for my mental and social well-being personally. But I don't think that they would accept that stance very much. The one redeeming quality in this entire little blurb right here is universal access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. Sustainable energy is bullshit. I mean, think back to what I already said about sustainability and then consider that solar panels and wind are A, intermittent and unreliable low density forms of energy, and B, that the production of these things requires resources which are in no way sustainable or renewable, and that in a couple of years we'll probably be seeing a whole lot of outdated, old and broken down solar panels, of which we have very little clue on how we're actually going to handle the waste. But at least one positive thing that I was going to make this about was the fact that they point out that it's important to have access to affordable and reliable energy, which is absolutely true, because affordable, reliable energy is the lifeblood of modern civilization. The lifeblood of your life, my life, what I'm doing right now, everything we do every day in and out would not be possible without universal access that we have here in most industrialized nations to affordable and reliable energy. So, I'm going to read little point number 9. We envisage a world in which every country enjoys sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth and decent work for all. A world in which consumption, production patterns, and use of all natural resources, from air to land, from rivers, lakes, and aquifers to oceans and seas, are sustainable. One in which democracy, good governance, and rule of law, as well as an enabling environment at the national and international levels, are essential for sustainable development, including sustained and inclusive economic growth, social development, environmental protection, and the eradication of poverty and hunger. One in which the development and the application of technology are climate sensitive, respect biodiversity, and are resilient, and one in which humanity lives in harmony with nature, in which wildlife and other living beings are protected. Our species, not beings. Man, I could go into this entire statement bit by bit, but I mean, it's the same type of emotional language, overbearing attitude, decent work for all, mandated by the United Nations, sustainable consumption, production patterns, and use of all natural resources. Don't need to point out again what the flaws in that idea are. The point shows you once again how little these people understand about the basic nature of reality, of the economy, of production, etc. Social development, which is of course what they define it to be. What they define as listening to them, implementing their goals, that's development, that is progress apparently. Development and application of technology should be climate sensitive, so you should take into account the climate. I'm not going to get into that right now, but once again, this overbearing attitude, this idea that they know best. And then the last little bit of 13, I'm not even going to read the entire thing. Just going to point out that it gets worse after this. I'm going to point out the fact that they think it's very important to combat inequality within and among countries. And we'll see in a couple of slides just exactly how far they propose on going with that. So let's continue. They start off by mentioning the predecessors to this document, the Millennium Development Goals. They also immediately admit that this is a different beast, however. In its scope, it goes far beyond the Millennium Development Goals because it also sets out a wide range of economic, social, and environmental objectives. It promises a whole host of things, among other things, more peaceful and inclusive societies. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals with 169 associated targets, integrated and indivisible. They mentioned before deep interconnections and many cross-cutting elements. basically to reduce the maneuvering room, the wiggle room in implementing these things for governments, or at least that's the way it seems to me. But I'm very much intrigued by this one sentence under header 18. We reaffirm that every state has and shall freely exercise full permanent sovereignty over all its wealth, natural resources, and economic activity. And I think that this little sentence here was thrown into the mix to assuage people's doubts, to suss the naysayers, to lull them. But it does the opposite for me, because it once again proves that, or shows me, or makes me deeply, deeply suspect that these people have a completely warped understanding or conception of these things, from my perspective at least. When they say that every state has and shall freely exercise full permanent sovereignty over all its wealth, natural resources, and economic activity, then I wonder, what is that? What is a state's wealth, natural resources, and economic activity? And what does it mean for the state to have permanent sovereignty over all of that? Could this be that this actually points to the opposite of what I would actually think it to be? That this actually says, you're the state. If you want, you can take control of all of these things. You have permanent sovereignty over it, so you have no excuse not to take control over it in service of the 17 goals and 169 associated targets. Perhaps. So in point number 19, they reaffirm the importance of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And, well, yeah, that document is just stiff with positive rights and huge cop-out clauses to deal with the fact that it's improperly worded as positive rights. So it's a shitty document. And human rights as defined by the United Nations are dangerous to the holders of those rights. They are incoherent and not good for much. I would like to use this opportunity to point out that one of the many technical terms that has been getting, or terms with a certain technical meaning that has been getting a bad rap the last decades, actually, is discrimination. As the great Christopher Hitchens, the late and great, sadly, Christopher Hitchens once said, discrimination is the greatest tool a human being is given, and it is wasted on racists. And what he meant by that is that to discriminate means to choose between alternatives based on a set of characteristics. So if I choose between a pencil and a pen, then there are many things that I can use. If I want to erase what I wrote, or want to be able to erase it, I might prefer the pencil on the basis of a lack of permanence. If I don't want it to be easily erased, I might use a pen. If I want to write on my hand and on a piece of paper, I'm going to pick a pen based on different characteristics. If I'm going to choose my friends based on their race rather than the fact of whether or not I like them, they like me, they can stand my asshole attitude every now and then I'm a fucking idiot. But I should be free to be that fucking idiot so that other people are free to associate with me or not based on that open knowledge. If you make it illegal for me to be an idiot, well, then you don't change anything about me. I don't learn anything. I'm just afraid. Plus, then there will be a whole lot of unidentifiable idiots walking around, and I don't like that idea. So point number 20, realizing gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls will make a crucial contribution, and so on. It does. Real gender equality, as in the actual approaching of equal rights between men and women, because there's usually in all nations still a little bit of a difference between the rights of men and women. And in some Western nations, I mean, it usually amounts to men not having rights that women do have, or not having protections that women do have. In some cases, there are even arguments and proper arguments to be made for that. But leaving all that aside, nations where women are more free to make their own choices are more prosperous than nations where this is not the case. Just like in general, nations where people in general are able to make their own choices, have economic freedom, have personal freedom, they are usually better off economically than nations where this is not the case. So that's true, but when they speak about closing the gender gap, they are once again making a whole lot of assumptions. They're assuming that you should have a 50-50 or 49-51 gender ratio in all aspects of life and society, which is not going to be the case. Which I mean, I do not see on what assumptions you are basing this. I don't see why one would reasonably assume that. There are too many differences on average between men and women for that to be the case. Both both physical and mental and social. And any child could tell you that. But some people have convinced themselves otherwise, it would appear. So, in closing, I would like to read a tiny little bit from another document. The document itself isn't very important, it's just a little definition of what gender mainstreaming is, or the mainstreaming of a gender perspective. Gender mainstreaming, then, means that the socially constructed differences between men and women are taken into account, as well as their possible impact in all domains and at each step of the policy process: design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. Indeed, political decisions always apply to men and women, yet this is often the case that a masculine perception of things influences political decisions implicitly. In other words, every political decision has a gender perspective whose impact must be assessed in positive or negative terms so that informed decisions may be made. So, gender mainstreaming entails that the gender perspective should be taken into account in all political and social decisions, policies, and programs in implementation, planning, monitoring, and evaluation. Ladies and gentlemen, there we go. So let's move on to the next slide. People who are vulnerable must be empowered. More emotional language, because it doesn't mean anything unless you define things narrowly and uselessly. 24. We are committed to ending poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including by eradicating extreme poverty. That last one is a specific goal. Eradicating extreme poverty. Extreme poverty defined as a living standard of less than so much dollar a day. What was it, 3 or something, I think, inverted for, well, taking into account inflation and all that. That's an actual set goal. That's something you can point to. That's something you could potentially achieve even. It's not even a goal that I particularly disagree with. You could do it while you could actually do that. You could actually eradicate extreme poverty, or almost eradicate it, or drastically reduce it, even from this extremely low level, 10%, low by historical standards. You could actually lower it so much more by 2030 without doing any, or without doing too much damage to anything else. But the way that they're putting all this shit forward doesn't make me willing to hold my breath for that, especially when they say that all people must enjoy a basic standard of living, including through social protection systems. So that's more internationally mandated social programs no longer, that's more choice and freedom taken away from the citizens. That's more anti-democratic drivel. Then we seek to 27. We will seek to build strong economic foundations for all our countries. Sustained, inclusive, sustainable economic growth is essential for prosperity. This will only be possible if wealth is shared and income inequality is addressed. What? So, wealth redistribution and income redistribution mandated by the United Nations. Thank you very much. While they're saying in point 28 that they will commit to making fundamental changes in the way that our societies consume and produce goods and services, or go to free markets, free market economy, the thing that has brought us this technology, this unimaginable wealth and prosperity that has increased the living standards and the life expectancy of nearly every human being on this entire planet, of which there are more now than ever before, living in luxury unimaginable to people just 200 years ago. And they want to break it because of their flawed conceptions, because of their hubris, they think they know better. Changing unsustainable consumption and production patterns, implementing a 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production patterns, centralized planning. Central planning does not work. It has been proven to be both theoretically and practically impossible, because without a free market, without a market to decide prices, there is no way to do this without incurring massive costs. The free market is the most efficient way of letting the economy do its work. The economy is the system in a society that distributes scarce resources with alternative uses. Wood, raw wood, even just a tree you cut down, is a scarce resource. There's only so many trees, only so many people qualified as lumberjacks, so both the trees itself and the lumberjacks and their outputs, they're all scarce resources. Because the lumberjacks could be used for other jobs, for landscaping, for instance. The trees could be left. The trees could be left there, and if they're maple trees, you could use them for harvesting maple syrup, for instance. Or you could leave the land where the trees are on there as a little forest area and exploit it as a hunting ground. Whatever. And the economy is the system that decides how these resources, the land, the labor, all kinds of other things, are distributed among all these possible things that you can do with them. Make milk out of ice cream, make cheese out of ice cream, all the other possibilities. And you can either have a king or a nobleman or a centralized government institution handle where each of these products is going, where their output is going, and how this is distributed, and so on. But that doesn't work. History has proven that does not work, that human beings do not have the capability of doing this on such a large scale. If we let people compete in a free market, then that evens out to the most efficient way of handling the system. And central planning is incapable of competing with that system in any way, shape, or form. It does not give people the same standard of living, and that is, in the end, is what matters. It does not give people the same standard of living, so their environment is not as clean, they are not as healthy, they do not live as long, they are not as happy, they are not as comfortable. And that is what it boils down to eventually. That is what actually matters. Is the system actually fairer if people suffer more? Everybody suffers more. Then point number 29, we recognize the positive contribution of migrants for inclusive growth and sustainable development. And migrants and migration, in many cases, has positive impacts on a society, and quite potentially a lot of positive impacts. However, it also has negative impacts. And certain types of migration have certain types of positive and negative contributions. And uncontrolled immigration is not a net benefit to a society in most cases. And I'll just leave it at that and continue on to the next slide. This is the last one. We've gone through most of the introductory parts of the Sustainable Development Agenda by now. I won't read the entirety of header number 35. I'll just go through the main points. Sustainable development cannot be realized without peace and security, and peace and security will be at risk without sustainable development. A cannot be without B, and B will be at risk without A. Once again, more emotional language, trying to associate things that people already associate positively, like peace and security, with sustainable development, making it seem like these are dependent upon each other and we need United Nations for this. Once again, a shitty definition, a little bit on saying something like right to development, more positive rights and bullshit like that, with all the consequences that go with it. And they say something here, we must redouble our efforts to resolve or prevent conflict and support post-conflict countries, including through ensuring that women have a role in peace building and state building. I wonder why. That just seems like sexist drivel to me. Why is it so important that women have a role in peace building and state building? Maybe you should ensure that citizens have a role in peace building and state building. You know, the people that actually most benefit from peace. Crazy idea. I know. 36, all cultures are beautiful. Oh, sorry, no. We pledge to foster intercultural understanding, tolerance, mutual respect, and an ethic of global citizenship and shared responsibility. Shared responsibility, not personal responsibility. Global citizenship, but you know, nationalism is evil, and national citizenship doesn't have anything to do because migration is great. Tolerance and mutual respect, it's not so very mutual. And how can you demand mutual respect when you don't even respect yourself? When you don't even respect your own culture? When you don't even understand the basic concepts of how your own society works or your own history? You have such a warped perspective on these things, and then you claim you can be in a relationship of mutual respect with anybody else when you don't even respect yourself? Jesus. They recognize that all cultures and civilizations can contribute to and are crucial enablers of sustainable development. So all cultures are beautiful. Today, we are taking a decision of great historic significance. We resolve to build a better future for all people, including the millions who have been denied the chance to lead decent, dignified, and rewarding lives. Denied the chance by whom? If not by usually corrupt governments. We can be the first generation to succeed in ending poverty, just as we may be the last to have a chance of saving the planet. More fear-mongering. It's absolutely fantastic. Then, the last little bit in closing. We the peoples are the celebrated opening words of the Charter of the United Nations. Super collectivism. It is we the peoples who are embarking today on the road to 2030. It is an agenda of the people, by the people, and for the people. And this, we believe, will ensure its success. As if by saying it, it magically becomes true. As if by saying it, all of a sudden the walls of their ivory towers are shattered, and they are standing there among the normal people, as if they have any conception of the kind of world that they are trying to create. So with that, I will leave you. I've been Rembo. Here on this last little slide, you'll find a link to the original document, ARES 71. I would like to thank everybody in the LIA for their continued patience and support. And the Liberalist of the Netherlands and Flanders, be sure to check out our associated websites, Facebook pages, Discords, and various other things. This was Untrustworthy, the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you for watching.